Welcome to Life Recovery Today with Stephen Arterburn. In the next half hour, you'll obtain insights and tools to transform your life using the biblical principles found in the 12-step program. We believe everyone can benefit from a life recovery experience because we all have struggles in life. Struggles with addictions, food, depression, anxiety, and relationships, to name a few. You'll be encouraged to see how others have found a new way of life with hope for the future through life recovery. Your host is Steve Arterburn, founder of New Life Ministries and Women of Faith, author of over 100 books, and teaching pastor at Northview Church in Carmel, Indiana, one of the 20 largest churches in America. Steve is the co-editor of the Life Recovery Bible, the #1 selling recovery Bible. With over 3 million copies sold, this is the Bible given to inmates by Prison Fellowship and the Pew Bible for the Salvation Army. Now here's Steve.
Hi there, Steve Arterburn here, and welcome to Life Recovery Today. Today you're going to hear from one of my favorite people in all the world, Becky Brown. She's a clinician. She's been over all of our clinicians here at New Life, and she's been doing recovery for a very long time. Today it's kind of a special topic because, as parents, you see what's going on with your adult children, and it's not always fun. And these sons and daughters many times are just full of strife and struggle. Sometimes it's because addiction has impacted them, or they may have their own addiction problem. It could be just a difference of opinions. It varies, and we see it all here at New Life. Well, when conflict creates division and disconnection, these recovery principles that we have come to believe in, they don't just work on drug addicts, alcoholics, gambling problems. They work with everybody. They work with family relationships. We also know that in the midst of all of this, as parents, we just pile up one regret after another if we're not careful. And those regrets can impact the relationship when we feel shame and guilt about everything we've done, especially if we're feeling shame and they're wanting to blame us for everything that's gone wrong. Well, hey, guess what? Recovery provides a path toward freedom from all of those regrets. You know what I think recovery is all about? It's calling a person to true, authentic adulthood. It calls you to do some responsible things that are uncomfortable, and for many you'd say, well, they're not really natural. You just wouldn't necessarily choose to do those things. I think one of the greatest things in our relationships with our adult children, which seem to be more and more complex all the time, I think that when we are able to resolve our issues, respond to them rather than react, give them grace rather than judgment, listen to them rather than lecture them, it really goes a very, very long way to building the relationship and then eliminating those regrets that might just continue to pile up. Becky Brown is an author. She's a tremendously successful counselor. Fortunately, she closed her practice down, went to work with New Life. She is one of our co-hosts on New Life Live, and she really understands these issues. So, let's listen to Becky Brown on these very recovery principles.
Hi, I'm Becky Brown, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about parenting your adult sons and daughters. Now, we just have a workshop, Fearless Parenting for Adult Children, and it's such an oxymoron. You have adult children. Well, actually, they're not children anymore, but we get calls on the radio so many times about the struggles in these relationships. Everything from the breakdown of the relationship where their adult children are not speaking to them, to just the ongoing strife that goes on in families. And our workshop will help you with all of these different details about how to deal with this. But one of the takeaways that I want to encourage you to think about is many times we think that the problem is them. If our sons and daughters would only be more respectful, or understand our side of the street, or do what we say, or just, make sense, because sometimes it feels like they're making really crazy decisions. But what I want to challenge you with, if this is the situation in your family where there is strife or there is some chaos going on with your adult sons and daughters, take a look in the mirror. I know it's kind of a difficult thing because you think, well, of course it's their problem. If they would just act more respectful, or if they would understand my view, then maybe we could get along. But what can you do to make a better connection with them? And many times you can't get past what the issue may be about so that you can look at how you're contributing to the problem. In recovery, we talk about working your side of the street. And one of the first steps in dealing with your adult sons and daughters is recognizing what part of the problem is mine. When you look at the last argument that you had with your adult kids, think about the interchange. And how many times was your reaction bigger than it needed to be, when you actually just needed to listen? Sometimes there can be a conversation and you don't have to give your 2 cents because it just is what they think. You don't have to correct everything that you disagree with. Now that may be shocking, but your job raising them ended when they were around, 17 or 18. You don't really, have that job anymore. And so if you're not understanding that you've got to release them to their own lives, it's going to create strife in and of itself. Now, there are some big issues. I get it. There are some things that are just wrong and hurtful and painful. In those situations, you may be thinking, if they would understand me, then we could get through this. There are some situations that are so difficult that they may not want to connect with you. So in those situations, I want you to think about, is there anything that I've done that has contributed to their pain? Do I need to make amends for something that I have done either in the past or in the most recent past? How can I apologize, make right, or pay restitution to something that I've done? Sometimes in our shame and our guilt, we react and we create this disconnect with those that we love. And we lose sight of the bigger picture of trying to have a healthy relationship. One last thing. This is one of those situations where you can make a positive difference in the lives of your sons and daughters if you take a step back. Now that seems contrary to the situation. You may feel every urge to go and fix it, to take control, and to make them understand what is wrong and how it needs to go forward. What I want to ask you is, what is the big picture that you want for your family? How would you like the future of your family and your legacy with your kids to be? You can have that choice. Now, if religion is one of those things that has separated you, you might not want to greet them with a Bible verse every single time you see them. Or you might want to not send them all the Christian materials. Now, while that's a good idea in theory and in concept, but if they're resistant to that, they are going to be defensive and they're not going to connect with you. And so I want you to create those conversations where it's about, what do you have in common? How can you connect? And what are some good things that you can look forward to in the future? Now, I know this just scratches the surface, and I know there's some really hard, difficult relationships that are occurring between parents and adult children. We have a workshop that you can attend, but in the meantime, begin to do your own work. Maybe you need to look at getting into therapy. Maybe you need to join a group. Maybe you need to do some 12-step recovery work. Whatever way that you can, become the whole healthy person that God created you to be, and your relationship with your adult children will probably improve over time. It's worth a try. If you need any help, call us 1-800-NEW-LIFE. On this video, we are going to talk about regrets. We all have them, and if you don't, you might be a sociopath. And I mean that in all the loving ways I can possibly, explain. Here's the thing. If you live long enough, you're going to make mistakes, or you're going to do things that didn't quite work out the way that you thought it was going to work out. And so we have to learn to live with that regret. Now, one of the things that I know is that regrets are not things that are necessarily deal breakers, but they can be. You know, there can be some really bad choices that you've made and you just ruminate over what you did and could have done it different, and I wish it would have gone differently. You know, if you want to live in the present, you have to let go of the things in the past. And it's not to say that you don't want to make right the things that you've done wrong. You do want to do that. That can also help with your regrets. But you can also kind of get focused on the things that didn't happen that you wished could have happened. And so then you begin to live in this wishful thinking. And then you miss out on your present, and you don't even think about the future because you're so focused on, I wish it could have been different. I wish it could have been better. And actually, part of that work is grief work. You know, there can be regrets that we have that were not of any, you know, of our doing. It was just something that we experienced. It could be a loss of a loved one, a job, a marriage, and we have regrets from that. If you begin into looking into grieving the loss, accepting the loss, you can move forward. And when that memory comes up again, you won't have that instant regret. You won't wish that it could have been differently, you know, to that depth, but you'll be able to look at it and understand you did the best that you could at that time. I want to encourage you, if you're living stuck in a regret, begin today by connecting with somebody else. You know, life recovery groups are great for this because you can begin to process and you can hear other people. Everybody's got regrets. And again, like I said, if you don't, there might be something wrong with you. I want you to have an understanding of what you've done wrong or right and move forward in that so that regrets don't keep you stuck in the past and so that you can have a great future. I hope that helps.
Are you going through your struggles alone? Do you want someone to talk to help you through your pain? Do you feel like a failure when you relapse again, telling yourself, next time will be different? Don't walk this path alone anymore. Join a life recovery group today and be a person that your friends and family can be proud of. God created us to be in community, and we believe everyone can benefit from a life recovery experience. There are life recovery groups all over the country, and if there isn't one in your area, we can help you start one. Life Recovery brings recovery to you, right where you are. You'll take a journey with others to find healing and freedom. Whether you're looking to join a group or start one, New Life Ministries is here for you. Call us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE or visit liferecoverytoday.net.
Hey, well, welcome back. Using these recovery principles in all areas of our lives, they're going to help us experience freedom. And in this segment, Becky's going to help us deal with fear and understand how it impacts our lives. I think one of the most frustrating things is when we think we're the only ones who have this fear, but it is so common. Here's Becky to talk about it.
Hi, I'm Becky Brown, and for this video, we are going to talk about dealing with fear. Now, fear gets a bad rap. A lot of times people will say, you know, you should live fearless or fear is a liar. Well, actually, fear has some really good qualities. It can keep you out of trouble if you're aware of the things that you might stay away from. A good, healthy dose of fear can help you. However, what I'm talking about are those fears that lock you up. The things that keep you from moving forward in your life. And they can be based on a lot of truth. You could have had experiences, that's what we talk about with trauma, that when you've had an experience that has caused fear and, you've experienced trauma of any level, it can create this kind of anxiety and this fear that kind of echoes in everything that you do. You can get to a place where you become fearful of moving about in the world or connecting with other people. So we want to talk about that today because fear can control us and it can keep us from experiencing the peace and the joy that God has for us. So when you think about the things that you might be afraid of, or maybe fear has locked you up in some way, there's an acrostic that says false evidence appearing real. That stands for fear. But sometimes there's true evidence that is real, or the reality, and we live in that. So for example, let's say that you become fearful of the future. Raising kids can cause a lot of stress and worries. And I know for some of you, you've had challenges with your kids and you start to begin to fear what their future will look like. There's some reality in that. It's not to say that everything's going to work out, but how do you manage that fear when there are things that point to the reality that there could be some truth in it? It's, balancing that. Also, if you've experienced trauma, that fear that comes up in you is this defense mechanism that's supposed to keep you out of trouble again. But you also have to find a way to heal that. Trauma can be healed, but it has to be felt, it has to be processed, and that in and of itself can create fear for anyone to seek help. I mean, how many times have I heard that where, somebody will say, this terrible thing happened to me 10, 20, even 30 years ago, and I've never been able to talk about it. And that fear has locked them up in a way that it's disconnected them from family, from friends, and in their minds, it's a reality. And I have such compassion because I know that there is help for trauma that can be healed. We talk about with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. When you've experienced horrific things in life, your brain takes that in and it becomes like it's happening all the time. If you've ever known anyone that has dealt with PTSD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That, the example always is like a car backfiring and they jump like they've just been shot at, or nighttime terrors. Those are the deep recesses of fear that can invade our brains and affect our lives. But there is hope and there is help. And, one of the steps that you have to do is you have to be able to tell somebody. One of the worst things is that you're afraid and then you don't want to talk about it. Because sometimes you think, it's ridiculous that I feel this way, or I should be over it by now. Or maybe even somebody told you, what is there to be afraid of? That's always helpful. I think if you can think about the freedom on the other side of the fear, it can help you seek help. So, for example, have you ever heard the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Well, for some folks, fear has them locked in their house, and it may be, I would go to the mailbox to get the mail. And that may seem extreme, but when fear is governing your life, those are the kind of things that occur to you. There's other things that happen with fear. It can keep us in a bad job. We're afraid that if we look for another job or if we reach out, that it might be worse than the one we're in. It could keep you in a bad marriage. We hear all the time about situations where marriages have been even abusive and one or the other of the spouse didn't feel like they could leave. They were afraid to leave. And of course, fear can also lead to unhealthy habits, and it also helps us tolerate terrible things because we're so afraid to ask for help or to get out of a situation that we put up with stuff that we should not put up with. So fear, while it has some good qualities, and it's a God-given gift, I mean, if that's a gift, it can help you stay away from really bad things, but it also can keep you stuck. And it also, if it's rooted in trauma, can have impact in your life and in your relationship. So we want to get some good help for this. So, there's a quote from Nelson Mandela. He says, don't fear change, change fear. And I think that's so insightful because we're going to be afraid at times. We're going to have fear at times. And it's not to ignore that fear, but it's literally to say, okay, what am I feeling? I'm feeling afraid. What am I afraid of? And then go through asking yourself, is the thing that I'm afraid of something that I need help with? Is it something that I've experienced before and so I'm feeling that fear again? And is it something that I just am not sure of? The fear of the unknown or the fear of the future can keep us from even moving forward just even in normal everyday routines. And certainly in the last couple of years with the pandemic, there has been an underlying level of fear and anxiety because people were afraid of being sick. People lost loved ones that got sick. And so it just underlined that fear. And we weren't created to live in fear, but yet it's part of our everyday life. And then one place where fear operates irrationally is a fear of making a mistake, which it doesn't make sense, but literally we can get locked into not doing anything because we're afraid of doing something wrong. So, it keeps you from making a risk or taking a chance or doing something new. And so we want to manage fear. We don't want to ignore it. We don't want to live in it, but we want to accept it. We want to be aware of what we can do when we feel afraid. And, it's also can be a futile attempt to control others. When we're afraid, sometimes we will try to control the things around us or the people around us because we're afraid of what will happen. Just recently, I was on a plane and my husband and I were sitting next to each other and they were delivering the drinks. Now, this is a very minimal thing of fear, but it was in my head. They handed him the hot coffee and I had a glass of water. And I literally was afraid that one of us was going to spill something. And, I don't know what I thought was going to, until you get a bunch of napkins, right? But if I wasn't aware of that fear, I could legitimize being anxious, being fearful, and making a big mess. And it didn't ever happen. There are a lot of things in our life that we're afraid of, but when we don't assess them or don't have a good perspective, it can make a little problem into a big problem. Understanding fear is how we manage it. So when we fight fear, it can grow. And sometimes we have to manage the fact that it's going to take on a snowball effect. This also happens in trauma. We talk about the fight, flight, or freeze. And I would say that fear is motivated in all of those kind of responses in the brain. It often becomes distorted. Our brain, specifically the amygdala, will scan for danger. It's just kind of that, the way that we were created to look for things. If you're crossing a street, you want to make sure that there's not a car that's going to run you over. That's a normal kind of process, that fear of being safe or not being safe. That's a good thing. But if your whole life becomes wrapped around making sure everything is safe all the time, it's going to keep you from living that life that you were intended to live. So we need to develop an awareness of when fear is operating us as opposed to us being able to manage it. And sometimes the fear of change can keep us stuck in that feeling as well. There are people that are afraid of heights, for example, and so they'll never go higher than a second floor. And so that they can manage their fear that way. It's not to say that you can't, stay on the ground. That's okay. But if it begins to drive you away from things that you would normally enjoy, you want to make sure that you seek some help for that. So what can we do to break the grip of fear? Recovery is a great way to start. It's just admitting that fear has become unmanageable and we need to have help. We also need to talk about it with somebody, whether it's a counselor, whether it's a group. If you have trauma and that's where the fear is coming from, you need healing. And the picking up of the phone to call for help can be fearful in and of itself. But once you begin the process and commit to healing whatever is locking in that fear, you're going to experience a better and a free life. I want you to seek help so that you can understand where fear might be driving your life. In Isaiah 41:10, the prophet says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." That's the promise that when you get fearful, God's right there with you to help you through that. It also can help to do some body work or breath work. A lot of us walk around, don't ever take a breath. And if you can, just breathe in and exhale, you'd be amazed at what that will do for your brain and for your body. Walking can also help alleviate some of that fear that you have. Of course, it's not It's not that simple. I'm not trying to give you a simple answer, but literally walking it out, helping your body's own chemicals work for you, can really help calm you down and create some peace. Dealing with fear is a life skill. You know, when we're children and we're afraid of the dark, our parents will tell us it's all okay, there's nothing to be afraid of. And eventually we have a new perspective. We can look around and we can see that there isn't anything to be afraid of. That the things that we are afraid of, we can learn to manage them. We can learn to ask for help. We can learn to seek help to get some healing. And then experience life in a way that we can accept fear when it comes, we know how to manage it, and it doesn't have control over our lives. So I want to encourage you, begin today to address the fears that are operating your life. Whether you talk to a therapist or get into a group, or maybe even call New Life Live and begin the conversation of saying, I want to deal with this fear that's attempting to control my life and keep me from living a full and free life. I hope you'll call.
I always love Becky's teaching, and I also love the fact that you've joined us today for Life Recovery Today. Maybe today you realize that there's some area of your life that needs a little bit of work. Well, you know, no one thing changes everything. And so we can go to work on the big thing, and when we get the big thing out of the way, we start to see some other things that are really important to deal with too. So if you need another step, if you need to ask for help, if you need a recovery group or see a counselor, you can always call us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE. But first, maybe it's time to decide to deal with the very fear you really don't like to talk about or share with anybody. Or maybe it's time to no longer hold on to the regrets or pile them up. You did your best with what you knew at the time. You did your best with the strengths that you had or the weaknesses that you were dealing with. So maybe it's time that the very grace that God has given all of us, you give it to yourself. It's really a huge step toward finding freedom in the way we feel, the way we think, and the way we recover. I want the best for you. God wants the best for you. And if these old things are just dragging you down, there's some new ways, new strategies that you can implement. And if you need help doing that, well, you can contact us, 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Really appreciate you being with me. Hope that you'll join me next week. Really enjoying bringing you the teaching that I think can enhance certain areas of recovery that don't often get addressed. Remember, recovery is for everybody.
Thanks for joining us for Life Recovery Today with Stephen Arterburn. We hope this program has helped you integrate God's truth and wisdom into your recovery journey. This program is brought to you by New Life Ministries, and it's your support that keeps this program on the air. When you contact us for any reason, be sure to let us know that you watch on NRB. Call us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE or go to liferecoverytoday.net. Please join us again next week for more Life Recovery Today.